discussion today, exchanging some tips and tricks. I figured I'd start things off a little bit with what we're doing at Oklahoma DOT. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Molina. I'm with the Oklahoma Transportation Library. And one of the things that we've struggled with at our organization is actually getting people invested in Section 508 compliance. A lot of PIs don't know about it or are learning about it. And so, as far as tips and tricks, one of the things we struggle with is just getting people to care. Like, what's a good tip to get people to pay attention to Section 508? And also the amount of remediation that people have to do, it's a lot to remember. Like, I don't know half the stuff that I should related to it. But one thing that's helped us on our end is we're developing a mandatory training course that we're going to institute for Section 508, and we've prepared a preliminary presentation or PowerPoint that we're going to do when we host these training webinars for our PIs. So I'm going to start things off by showing a sample of this PowerPoint presentation that shows some of the tips and tricks and things that we do, and hopefully help people get invested who do research for us into why they should care about Section 508. And after this brief presentation, I'd like to open it up to anyone else, maybe to discuss what your pain points are or what tricks or tips you have learned either in Microsoft Word, in Adobe PDF, or any format that you're using Section 508. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And so hopefully I get a verbal confirmation everyone can see the PowerPoint slide?
We see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So it's a work in progress. It's nowhere near finalized, but this is a little bit of what we're doing at ODOT as far as the topics that we're covering for Section 508. We intend it to be as holistic as we can without overwhelming people, going into why Section 508 is important and some of the big issues that we run into that people should keep a lookout for. Again, it's not totally comprehensive, but these are just the big topics that we continually run into with PIs, who don't normally know about Section 508. Everyone usually forgets about titles and left justifications, heading styles. Equations are huge, alt text, making sure you have the right text equivalents, color, contrast, and tables as well. And some of this may be a little bit remedial, especially if you've attended any, like I know I've done a talk on tables before. A lot of this has come out of these elements that we've learned and picked up from other people and that we presented on. And we're just trying to put it together into something that's easily digestible for anyone who's even new to Section 508 and hopefully helps them as they remediate their document. So the first few slides, kind of the history of Section 508, the importance of it, how many people it affects, why you should care. And again, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I think as Section 508 people, we kind of automatically care already. And so I have it divided into categories. The first category being structure and format checkpoints. And these are the items that we go through whenever we review any report that comes into our library. And again, we wanted to make this as user-friendly as possible. So when we approach a topic like how to make sure your title is in the right place, we do screenshots and we do text to show how step by step that you do that. And so again, one of our checkpoints is to make sure the report title is defined in Microsoft Word. And you have a screenshot showing, well, you click on the info section, you go to title where the red arrow is showing, and you type in your title right there. Similarly, with left justification to make sure that your Word document is left justified. Here is an example. You see two examples here of one, how you should do it, and one, how you shouldn't do it. So things like that, where we talk about justification, headings. I know math equations have been a big one, essentially. And on this slide, we lay out how a lot of screen readers have issues with this and how you can just insert take a screenshot of the math equation and insert it into a Word document and then type in your alt text into that inserted image. And again, on this screen, we have a step-by-step way of how you do that, of how to take a screenshot, paste it into a document, and add your alt text. I think one of the other big things we want to focus on is what even is alt text and how to write good alt text. For example, we want to make sure that alt text is accurately describing everything that's being shown in an image. And we kind of lay it out in these bullet points. You know, you need to convey the intended meaning. Text in images is reflected as plain text when it's meaningful. Essential things like that that we have learned definitely help visually impaired reader be able to read and understand what is being presented. And again, we have a step-by-step guide on how to add alt text, what it looks like when there is no alt text, what it looks like when there is alt text, and what good alt text should read like. For example, we had one PI do an image of this road, a curve. We have the alt text saying, the figure shows a curved road in a foggy forest with trees lining both sides of the road. Fairly descriptive alt text. We felt that was pretty good. But the PI may have put in this image and just said, they may have used the little button down here that says generate alt text for me. And a lot of people think, well, if we just hit that button, then we're good to go. And if anyone has ever tried that, it is nowhere near the text equivalence that you may need. It may just say figure of an image or something, and it doesn't really convey what the intended meaning is. So again, we see this as a important guide to help establish that. And let me close out of this for 1 second. Make sure I'm not getting a notification here. Okay, sorry about that. All right. And so again, we look at different types of images like bars and graphs. We give sample alt text on what it should look like. For example, if an image has text, there's text in the image, but of course, if it's an image, a screen reader is not going to pick it up. For example, there's an image of a sign, and on that sign, the text reads, patient pickup and discharge only. Well, a screen reader is going to see it as an image, not pick up the text on that image, and is just going to completely skip over it. So we want to highlight that, well, if it's important for the reader to understand what is being shown in that image, you need to duplicate that text that is in that image. And here's an example of how you can do that. Similarly, we go into color and we try to get them to think about it like, is it even okay for you to use color in a report? Well, it's fine to use color, but it can't be the only way to convey meaning. And we try to illustrate this by changing things to grayscale to simulate what it would be like if a person had color blindness, for example. Then they wouldn't very well be able to tell based on the legend in that image what each of those colors is representative of. And again, we go through and say, well, maybe you should attach labels to the colors instead, or maybe you should attach shapes like squares and triangles and things of that sort to help distinguish things. So we go through different examples like anything and everything, hopefully, that a PI would encounter when writing a report. We want this to be the key for them to be able to solve that. Our last big thing is reviewing tables, and we give a link to the guidelines, the accessibility guidelines that we follow for tables. And then we go over definitions of simple tables versus complex tables, showing good and bad examples of each, why this is important, and how to fix many different examples of complex tables. I think we have at least 3 different tables that we help people remediate and show how to remediate those tables. And on our last slide, we provide the document accessibility evaluation form from ODOT that has every single checkpoint that we look out for to make sure it's ready to be submitted to the National Transportation Library, and our my contact information rather, at the end of the slide. And so again, this is more of a guideline for our PIs on how to do it. and it's nowhere near final, but we look forward to starting our training program hopefully by the spring of 2023. So that's a little bit about some of the ways we've found to kind of record the tips and tricks that we've learned and hopefully get PIs interested in Section 508 and make it more easily digestible because we found a lot of folks are just so overwhelmed by 508 they don't even know where to start. So we're hoping that by creating some kind of document like this, it can be more easy to follow. So that's a little bit about what's the going on at Oklahoma Department of Transportation. I'd like to hear from someone else about your program, what you're working on, frustrations you've been having, or maybe some tips and tricks you've learned that might help other people. And maybe we can just go around and workshop and see what's been working or not working with everyone else. And I see Enid has her hand up. Go ahead, Enid.
Hi. Um, as you probably all know, we do training twice a year, and it's a required training for all of our PIs. We do not accept any final reports if they're not 100%, well, as close to as possible, 508 compliant. So we sit down twice a year. We work with our PIs, especially with the graduate students who do the bulk of the writing of any
Mm-hmm.
of our final reports. And because this is their first glance at 508, we are still working on, and we've run into a couple of issues. We're still working on putting our training out on YouTube. And hopefully that way, then, whenever our PIs need to get a refresher, they can just jump onto YouTube, pull up whether it's tables, whether it's colors, alt text, formatting, whatever it is, they can just pull that information up. But like I said, we're having some issues with that. And so, that's something we're working on. But we've dove in, I can't even talk. We've jumped in with both feet into the 508 world. And we just make sure everyone, whether it's a data management plan that they send us, whether it's a proposal, whatever it is that they're sending us, that they make sure that it is 508 compliant so that when we send it out to NTL, the Wyoming State Library, wherever, that we're covered 100%.
Enid, do you have that training? Is that in your contract language, like they have to attend, or if they aren't able to make it, can they just watch the videos for credit, or how is that set up?
The only thing we have in the contract language, excuse me, it just states that they have to write, that the final report has to come to us 508 compliant. So
Hmm.
what we do then is we offer the training as a courtesy. And I send something around and I just say, here's when we're going to do our training. We would really like you to take the training. The nice part is most of our professors who are working with the grad students who are actually writing most of the reports, they require them to go through this training.
Hmm.
So they really, really push it. Um, and then, of course, once we get the draft of the final report from them, we go through, we run the compliance checker, we look for formatting, and I make comments into the report and I send it back. I don't change anything. And
Hmm.
it's kind of a way then that whoever's writing the report, now they have to go through and fix. And that will help them, I think, in the future because 508 is the future of the written word.
Have you received any blowback from any PIs or professors or people who don't see why this is important, or has everyone quickly kind of realized that, like you said, this is the future?
I think because I push it so hard that they've come to the realization. We've had some outside universities that at first they didn't want anything to do with it, you know, um, but when we talk to them at the very first, when we're working on the contract and they're working on their budget in the proposal phase, we tell them, remember, When you write your budget, make sure you're putting enough money into that budget so that, number one, you can write the final report. But number two, so that you can go through and make sure it's 508 compliant, and you can go through and check it for grammar and formatting, because those are things you're going to need to do. If you send it off to TRR, Sage Publishing, Elsevier, Science Digest, whatever, they don't accept stuff that isn't, grammatically correct, that isn't formatted properly, that they don't follow the rules and regulations. So we're just trying to keep them in that mindset.
That's great. That sounds like a really excellent program, and I think we may have to have a further discussion on that because as we're trying to compel our PIs to pay more attention to Section 508. Does anyone have any questions or comments to anything Enid said, or does anyone have any comments they'd like to bring up about your own organization or any issues you've been having with Section 508? I know there's at least someone who has some issues with Adobe PDFs. I'd raise my own hand on that. If anyone wants to go through any, maybe there's a report that you've gone through recently that's just really frustrated you, or a recurring problem that you've been having, or maybe no problems at all, or maybe you're just brand new to Section 508 and would like to just ask any questions about how maybe one of us have started the program. Jeffrey, yes.
Hello, sorry, took me a while to find the mute button. um, yeah, one thing that we've done that I think has helped is going ahead and creating a web page on our catalog that contains information that's not just ours, but also from, as you can see here, the federal government, as well as local information from our Texas government. And these things together help break down stuff into smaller chunks that people can use. That might be helpful for other people. I know that making someone digest the entire idea all at once can be a bit much, but this is maybe a way for them to take and find a reference on, like, how to deal with a table or colors and stuff like that. And excuse me, sorry, I'm so coughing so much. The all of this together, I think, was very helpful, and we do see traffic that comes to this site. And I don't remember offhand. I think we had our former librarian had a full presentation that she made, and it may have been cataloged into the piece of journal. Michael may remember that. And but yeah, that's something that we've done that I think is helpful.
That is really cool. Do you have a link to that? Would you be able to share a link to that in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
That's fantastic.
The if you ever visit our site, it's actually pretty easy to find. If you go to, go to our main page, it's right here under Explore, section 508, as along with other standards and specs that we have available. But yeah, let me go ahead and drop this into the chat. And hopefully this will give other people ideas on how to structure a more permanent reference that you can use.
Perfect. This is great. These are great resources.
Thanks. Yes.
It looks like there's a question in the chat as well, asking if left aligned is preferred over justified. We've always done left justified. I'm wondering if anyone does it any differently.
Michael?
Yes.
Left justified is the preferred for Section 508 over full justification. And the reason is individuals with dyslexia have issues dropping from one line down to the next line. And with left justification, dyslexia, esophoria, there were like 5, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there were 5 and I don't want to call them disorders, but that full justification really hinders them from reading a report, and they may have to use a ruler to go down, use their fingers on a screen. So left justification is the way to go according to the national Section 508 guidelines.
Perfect. Yeah, that's always what we've done, and sometimes I have to remember to go back and make sure and check with the national guidelines to make sure that we are, indeed, you know, aligning with those guidelines. And so far, so good. At least NTL hasn't rejected our stuff yet, so fingers crossed. Any other questions or comments to follow up? Yeah, this has been a fantastic resource posted by Jeffrey. This kind of makes me want to redo our own Section 508 section on our website.
Jeffrey, I'd love to sit down, and I'm sure Michael would too, and have a meeting with you sometime. There's,
Sure.
there's a lot I can do and a lot I can't do on our website, but I would love to sit and pick your brain. I'm looking at this website, and this is just fantastic. And so I didn't know if you would have time sometime to just sit down and kind of go through this, and I'm sure Michael would love to sit in on that, and I'm sure a lot of other people would too.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The main thing that I use to build the pages inside of here is Bootstrap, and Bootstrap's pretty easy to learn, and it depends on which version of Bootstrap your own website, which is probably using, will be using, and you can do the index cards, which is what I call these. So, as well as just playing around with it to make it look just right.
Now, these trainings that you did, is that trainings that were built at Texas? Or
No,
did you
no,
pick
this
up
is
from like section 508 .gov?
yeah, it's 508.gov.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'll follow any of the links, I think it goes 508.gov. This is not it's not material that we built, but we did collect together. Mainly, our previous librarian did a lot of work collecting together materials for this, and she was very, very passionate about this, and so she all I did was do the layout and make sure that the wording was quick. That's
Is it,
another thing. When you do language, as you all know, when you do language on the web, it has to be very different than it is in print. So, but
It looks like we have a question from Mary and also a question in the chat from Robin. Let's go with Mary first.
I just wanted to remind folks, because I was reminded by this conversation of the FHWA website on Section 508, and they've done some really nice things. I would also like to point out, for those who are new and may not be aware, that this community of practice helps NTL maintain a public guide on accessibility. So it's great. We're getting some really wonderful transportation specific resources that deal with 508. And I don't see a list of other there are training resources, but I don't see anything specific about. I don't think we have a list of other websites, because until recently we really didn't have that. But I can put together a short list and definitely add the text website, which looks beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, just to make sure that people can find everything at least from one place. So thank you for sharing that. And um, I'll put a link to this. Don't forget about the Federal Highway Administration's resource page. It's really pretty good as well.
Thank you, Mary. That's a good reminder that there are a lot of federal guidelines out there that we definitely can access. So a lot of good resources we have. Do have a question from Robin commenting on something Enid had said. Enid, you mentioned to remember when using colors to not use the stoplight colors, red, yellow, green, and Robin wanted to know what the reasoning for that was.
The red, yellow, and greens are usually the colors that are, there's, what is there, three or four different types of color blindness. Red, yellow, and green are the colors that get confused the most. So if you're going to use a red, yellow, or especially if you're going to use a red, yellow, or green, be sure to use something else. So if you have a pie chart, just don't make the slice of pie red. Maybe put some contrast in there, lines, dots, um, just so an individual who is looking at that can distinguish between the yellow piece of pie, the green piece of pie, which might have little hearts in it, and the red piece of pie, which might have, shooting stars or something in it. But just don't use color. But those are the three colors that are the hardest to distinguish for an individual who is colorblind.
Thank you, Enid. I actually have a question also. We've had some PIs in the past, and maybe someone has this similar experience, who through their own computer programs, it generates an image and that has bad color contrast or it doesn't follow Section 508 with regards to color or displaying an image. And we go back to them and say, could you use shapes or could you delineate differences another way besides using color? And they're like, well, this is the only program we have. That's the only way we output it. So could we just do an alt text on the image describing everything? Is that sufficient? And we've told them ideally we would prefer you to differentiate color with different shapes, but if that's the only way you can display it, then just go ahead and make sure there's a text equivalence describing everything in that figure exactly. Is that sufficient, I guess, Enid or Mary, for NTL acceptance, or should we really encourage them to go back and change those colors?
I would really encourage people to change the colors because there's a lot going on here. And I also want to mention about the contrast because contrast is really, really important too. It's not just the colors. So even if you pick colors that make your image accessible, you also need to make sure that there's sufficient contrast between them because in addition to the color blindness, there are people who are legally blind who really need to have the contrast when they blow up the images or use some type of assistive technology to view the page. Not all blind people are have total vision loss. So some of these things can be very helpful. Um, I would I would have a real problem, I think, with some accepting some of the tables that are not that are just captioned and not really remediated appropriately with color and contrast. Um, but we go through those individually when they're submitted to check on them. I don't know that we've rejected any, so I would just say to really encourage people to do their best because it is important to making their research reusable and findable.
I
My,
agree with I agree with you, Mary, 100%. We really make, um, we sit down and work with our PIs and whoever the authors are, and we do a lot of screen sharing and go through and try and figure out the best way to make whatever image, whatever chart, whatever graph, whatever it is, um, 508 compliant, because we want to make sure that we are sending out the best product possible, and we don't want Mary sending anything back. We love you, Mary.
Michael, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question about, and this is for Mary. With my organization, I am the one responsible for submitting many of the Texas Department of Transportation research deliverables to our local and national partners. Mary, could you describe for me a little bit about what happens when I submit a document to NTL? Do do you and your team check it for accessibility? Do you do any type of light remediation if you can? Or is that something like, I'm curious as to what happens when the document leaves my hand. And then can you also tell us, do you know how many things get rejected, or is that something that is just kind of out in the wind? Thanks.
That's a great question, Michael. And we actually haven't talked about this in a long time. And that's because our submitters are doing a really good job with the 508 accessibility. So, what happens when you submit something to NTL? If it was published after March 2018, we do run it through an accessibility checker. And if there's something really quick that the catalogers can fix, which is usually the case, like, they've just run the accessibility checker, they can just repair something and then move it through the queue, cataloging it and making it available. Now, originally, when we started implementing 508 accessibility in the repository, and that would have been towards the end of 2018, we rejected I would say most of our submissions, and that was even internal at USDOT submissions. And people weren't happy about it, especially my USDOT colleagues. They thought they had a special in with the library and they didn't have to do it. But we met with individual modal research groups and really got the message across, and they reworked their work processes to incorporate 508 accessibility. So we are not really seeing the problem that we had even 4 years ago. So the short answer to your question, we run it through the checker. If there are a few minor things, we fix it and just move it through the queue. So I'm not aware that we reject very many at all. If it's a problem, I'll know about it, but it's not a problem that I'm aware of. And I'm really happy to tell you that because of the previous problem that I described.
And Mary, which checker do you use? Is it Common Look or is it Adobe or is it
Uh,
something else?
we have both. Our
Okay.
catalogers are using both.
See, now that also raises an interesting intellectual issue. I work a great deal with Sarah McGavick, who is the editor slash publisher with us here at Center for Transportation Research. And we have found that Common Look and Adobe will not match precisely what is considered an error. Like I'll run it through Adobe and I'll see certain things, and Sarah might run it through Common Look and she'll see other things. So we've had a few conversations about what does that mean and which one might be considered the gold standard.
We've actually had that discussion in this group. It was a while back, like last year when we were
Right.
taking a look at Common Look. And So that was a really great finding that came out of this group. And plus, I'm part of I hang around with the 508 people at FHWA too. So we all kind of had that aha thing going on at the same time. So this is where our catalogers really use their judgment. And we're not looking for perfection as far as compliance goes, but we are looking to make the documents as accessible as possible. So it's a judgment call, uh, um, uh, how they're going to make the final document look, if that makes any sense.
Hey, Mary, it's Enid. I just wanted to add, I had done all that research on the common look, and then things happened and I had to step back away from everything. After the first of the year, I should have more information on maybe how we can get the different group together and get common look licenses, because they're not expensive, but we can get them at a cut rate if we go in on bulk. And
Have we looked into whether we can use pooled fund money to do a
yeah,
common look
we
license?
we can use it. I just don't know if we can use Michael's pooled fund to do it, because then only X number of states, those that are in on the pooled fund. But we could, we could set up just like they do for the peer exchanges. We could set up a pooled fund for common look, and that would be something we could talk about after the first of the year. But I do have the research. Like I said, I had to step away from everything. Things got a little cloudy in my life, but I think it's something we need to start, kicking back into high gear after the first of the year.
You know what, Enid? I think that's a great idea, and others will need to weigh in. But the other thing I think, and I'm so glad Michael brought this up, because we really haven't talked about common look in a while. And maybe now that some of us have some experience with it, it's time to revisit this in another 508 community of practice meeting. Because I'm sure we have greater expertise now as a group.
Yeah, because there were 4 of you, I think, that had been delving into common look, and you'd only been using it, what was it, 6 or 8 months when we first started talking about it.
Oh, even
And
less than that.
there were still some questions as to the how, whys, whats, wherefores, and all of that. And then we did some looking into the licenses. Like I said, they're not that expensive. I don't have the paperwork in front of me today, but the licenses, themselves per person are not that expensive, and we can go through, a pooled fund. Like I said, if we sat down and talked to Michael and added that on, I'm not going to say yes or no. That's what Michael wants to do for the library pooled fund. But we could run the common look through that, or we could set up another type of pooled fund to where the different DOTs, the different libraries, whatever, could go in, because the more licenses you buy, the cheaper the prices, the licenses become. And they told me they don't have to be all from one state, from one office. So there are different ways that we could go with that.
I think running it through the pooled fund, I think there is a lot of support for running that through the pooled fund. The only question would be, when we kick it back to members, do we want to limit it to just pooled fund members, or would our pooled fund members be okay with extending, say we get a couple dozen subscriptions that people could log in? Could people from outside the pooled fund log in? I think we'd have to get a vote from members on that, but I'd definitely be optimistic and willing to put that before our pooled fund committee. And speaking of which, on the topic of common look, do we want to make that our topic for the next meeting in February? Sort of a I don't know if show and tell is appropriate, but if the for folks who have had experience with Common Look, or if you want to get experience in Common Look in between now and then, kind of share your experiences, what's worked, what hasn't, just kind of do an informal roundtable of everyone's experiences. Do we want to make that a potential topic for February or kick that later down the road, maybe in, let's say, April or so?
Can we go February or March, Michael? Because I'm going to be out most of the rest of the year. And I want to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row when we start talking about it so I can talk intelligently about what the individuals at Common Look and I talked about, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Our next meeting, I think, Mary, correct me, it's February 14th, correct?
It is February 14th from 3 to 4. So I
Will,
might as well repeat the announcement I made because I know a lot of people joined the meeting a few minutes late, which is fine. Our next meeting is scheduled for February 14th from 3 to 4. And the announcement is also made on the TranLib list. So if you're not on TranLib, you can contact me or Michael Molina or Rosalind, and somebody will get you connected with the person who will add you to the list. So please join us and feel free to invite others in your organization who might be interested.
so Enid, does that work for you on February 14th, or would you like to save it for the next meeting, which would, I guess, be in, I think, April?
No, February would be good. I can throw the information out that I've gotten, and that will give me enough time. I have to be gone the next couple weeks, off and on, and so February would be perfect.
Great. And yeah, not to put everything off on you either. If there's other folks who have experience in Common Look, like I think the ideal format would be to have like a round table and everyone talk about your experiences with the platform and if it is worth, you know, investing some funding in for everyone to have access to. So if that works, then we'll go ahead and make that our next topic for February.
Mary, do you remember who all at the last time we talked about Common Look were the ones that were actually using it? My brain is fried, and I can't remember the names of you. There were you and three other people that were actually getting started using it, but I can't remember their names.
I seem to think Jennifer Herron was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Michael Molina, and I can't remember the other person.
Yeah, and it's
Hey, everybody, we're using it at TxDOT. Well, sorry, that's incorrect. We're using it at the Center for Transportation Research. We maintain a Common Look license for our purposes to help with the accessibility problems. Because when Kevin was still here, Kevin Barnes, she was looking into Common Look. I mostly use Adobe because my job with respect to accessibility and the publication process is usually at the very, very tail end where I'm fixing just minor things and then pushing it out to our national partners. But we've been working with Common Look for a little bit. Oh, yeah, we've been working with it for a bit.
Kevin was the other one that I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
for sure.
So yeah, we could have, a roundtable. Everybody bring your questions, everybody bring your thoughts, everybody bring your experiences, and then I'll bring what I found out um, from the people at Common Look as far as what we can and can't do. And then we can sit down and talk about how we want to proceed forward.
That sounds perfect. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Enid. That'd be great. Looking forward as well to future meetings. If you have any ideas for topics or want to present on something that you're doing at your organization, or even have questions or potential suggestions you'd like to see us covered, and please let us know. Now would be the time if you'd like to talk about it in chat, send us an email, or even just unmute and let us know. We would be happy to consider those topics and put you on a schedule if you'd like to present. And I will say it's never a bad thing to present at one of these because, it always reflects well on the agency to hear, oh, you're presenting at a national level, group. So I think it's always fun to present. So, but maybe I'm weird. But moving forward, does anyone have any last questions or comments as we got about 12 minutes left? So anyone else have any question? Sarah, yes.
Hi there. Yeah, so one thing that I've kind of been thinking about listening to this is that I'm in a bit of an intermediary position. As Michael Nugent mentioned, I'm the editor who works with the TxDOT to help all sorts of PIs throughout Texas universities and make their things publishable. So that means I kind of have more time to work with individual PIs on accessibility issues, but I also don't have that much authority. And one thing I've come up against is PI kind of disappearing on me when I go back to them and say, hey, I can help you with some of these things, but you really need to do, usually it's the alt text yourself. And, I have people I've been checking in with for months and months. And sometimes they get back to me and say, in a few more months. And sometimes they don't even bother. So I was kind of curious if other people had come across good ways to kind of extract these things from their PIs.
That's a great question. I'll step in with some of our experience from Oklahoma. We've had a lot of issues with folks who just don't want to do it, think it's dumb, don't understand why. And in our contract language, we have it built in that we'll withhold a certain percentage of your final funding if you don't make it ADA compliant or Section 508 compliant. Another way has been sometimes that doesn't even work and they still won't do it. And we have a clause in our contract that says if you refuse to, then we may not consider you for future contracts, going forward. So kind of the scary language helps. And also we've had to force them to attend one-on-one meetings to talk with us and go over point by point. Here's what you need to fix and make them say, yes, we'll fix it. That kind of thing. So unfortunately, I think contract language has been the most successful for us to enforce it.
That's helpful, though. I mean, I can mention that, to the people that I work with at TxDOT, that might make the difference. Do you give them a deadline for that?
Yes, all of their final reports need to be completed by a certain deadline specified in a contract. I think it's different for each report based on the time of which they, sign the contract, but they need to have their final report completely remediated by this deadline. And we do offer a bit of a grace period. Usually when we send our evaluation sheet to them, we give them a couple weeks to complete it. And if they don't, we send them stern email reminders. And if they continue to ignore that, then we threaten to withhold final funding and consideration for future projects. And that usually gets them going.
I bet. Thanks. That's really helpful.
Sure. Does anyone else have any experience with that?
Michael, we do the same. We make sure that we have the language in the contract. And the language in the contract says that 6 weeks prior to the end date for the deliverables in the contract, because you have the budget period and then you have the performance period. So 6 weeks before the end of the performance period, they have to have a rough draft sent to us that is, 508 compliant, formatted. We just call it a draft because we know that there's going to be some back and forth. And I guess because we've been pushing this for so long, we're talking clear back into 18, that we've had really good success. But that small piece of language in your contract really helps out. It has to be 508 compliant, you don't accept it. If it doesn't, you won't contract with them in the future if they don't do this correctly. Those little things like that kind of push most contractors to do what you want them to.
Thank you, Enid.
Makes sense. Thanks.
And for both Michael and Enid, what you're describing is where I would like the Research and Technology Implementation Division of TxDOT to start moving. We have seen over a period of time that the language within what's known as the university handbook has changed to include accessibility as a requirement for final deliverables. One of the next steps that I envision for that university handbook is a better explanation of what those standards are and the insertion of an actual checklist. Because right now, when I first started here, accessibility wasn't mentioned in contracts. And now here we are almost 7 years later, and accessibility is being mentioned much more frequently. And I think in a perfect world, I would love to have that 6-week period that Enid was describing, in which if your contract is done at the end of August of this year, we need the report by mid-July so we can go through this process. Because as Sarah mentioned, one of our biggest difficulties is we'll get the deliverable on the stroke of midnight on the final day of the project. So if there's a problem with it, who pays for that? If we have to go back to the PI and the team, it creates a little bit of friction on who might be responsible. But I've seen that we've had contracts within the TxDOT world be amended slightly to add in the addition of time, which I do appreciate. So I can kind of see everything is moving towards this final goal of you'll have the report in early, shocking. If you don't, you won't be considered again, shocking. But I think that's going to build so that we get to where Enid and both Michael are, where everybody's kind of just used to the new scheduling process. And I think I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great. It's the greatest day ever.
Michael, if you need, I can send you a copy of our contracts too, so that you can see the language. Because we follow the federal, both the performance period and then the budget period. So a contract, all the deliverables have to be done, say like on December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
Then FHWA, the federal statutes give you the next 90 days to clear out all the money.
So I'm not
that.
Right. I'm not privy to the actual contracts between TxDOT and the individual research teams. I just know what goes into the university handbook itself. I wouldn't be surprised if the actual contracts for a specific project mirror a lot of the language that you're describing right now. I think but I'll take a look at anything that I can suggest to my project manager at TxDOT to make this process as smooth as possible for our research teams, as gratifying as possible, so that we can, at the end of the day, celebrate this research at a national level, because people spend a lot of time and effort doing it.
Yeah, I'll get that. I'll send you a copy of that. And then if you want, unfortunately for me I'm a one-man show. So I do I make sure the proposals are done. I set up the RAC meetings. I write the contracts. I make sure that the final reports are done. I send everything off to Mary. I put it in RIP, TRID, whatever. So we don't do the volume that you guys do in Texas. But so yeah, I'm the one-man show.
Enid, that's a lot of institutional knowledge. You may have to interview yourself and record it.
Well, I told him, I said, one of these days when I win that lottery, I'm not coming back. And they asked me to please write my job description out. So.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I think I've definitely learned a lot from everyone. If there's any resources you would like that's been mentioned by anyone who's spoken, please reach out to either myself or Mary, and we'd be happy to get those links and things sent to you. Even if you'd like samples of contract language or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. We have a couple minutes left. I'll go ahead and give you a couple minutes back. Our next meeting is going to be on February 14th, same time, talking about Common Look. And again, if you have any suggestions or topics you'd like to hear us talk about, shoot us an email, drop us a line, and we'll be happy to bring that to fruition, either through bringing in guest speakers or talking from our own experience about this. So I think we work best as a collective and as a group to solve these issues. So this has been a great, great end of the year meeting. So thanks to everyone for attending. I hope everyone has a good Christmas or holiday end of the year. And I look forward to reconvening next year and maybe seeing some folks at TRB in January. So yeah, without further ado, thanks everyone, and hope you guys have a good rest of the year.
Thanks, everybody.